Hello, Garland Nixon here, and the brilliant plan of the Washington, D.C. neocons to rule the world has reached its apex. Let's talk. Well, hello, all Garland here, and it's Sunday evening, so let's just have a chat. Nothing big here, but I just want to chat. And where are we? Here we're in December, early December, 2022, and the winter is just really starting to set in. And what we're seeing here, if we look at this thing from a broad perspective, where are we? The neocons in Washington, D.C., over the last several years have been putting together a plan. And their plan, they could see the rise of Russia. The Obama people started talking about their pivot to Asia, their pivot to China, right? They overthrew the government of Ukraine on China's border in 2014. Again, part of their master plan to rule the world, to take Russia apart. Let's face it. This is what this is about. They want to take Russia apart and they want to get all of Russia's resources. And then they want to be able to dominate China, to to choke China off, to force China to capitulate, to become just another neoliberal off ramp for London and Washington so they can steal the resources and impoverish the people of those countries. That's what their plan is. And their plan has come together perfectly. They got what they wanted, right? In Ukraine, the plan was to overthrow the government of Ukraine, to install a rabidly anti-Russian government, right? There are a lot of people in the Biden administration. A lot of these neocons are Eastern Europeans who are Russian haters to the core. And so they're going to get in there. They're going to work with these Eastern Europeans who hate Russians. They're going to pump up Ukraine, the extremists in Ukraine to hate Russia. And they've been digging trenches and arming soldiers and practicing and setting things up so that this year they could have their war with Russia. And then they could, a couple of things. There was there's a couple years ago, I believe it was 2016, there's a video of Condoleezza Rice talking about how eventually the EU was going to have to cut off from Russia as far as energy, and that Russia would fall apart. But basically saying if we cut Russia and EU, if we split them as far as energy is concerned, Russia will fall apart before the EU does, and then basically, Russia will be toast, and we'll control Russia. We'll be in power of Russia. So their plan came together. 2022, they get this thing happening. They get their war. So now they've got their war on Ukraine's border, wherein there's going to be this long Afghanistan kind of thing on Russia's border. Russia's going to get sucked into this thing. It's going to take all of Russia's riches, all of their money. People there are going to get mad. They're going to overthrow Putin. Meanwhile, the people in Europe will struggle, but the U.S. can steal the industry, and all the industry from Europe can come over to the U.S. So the U.S. can now be the industrial power that it needs to be to compete with China. The people of Europe will be impoverished, but that's their destiny anyway. That's what they've got coming. And not only that, once they become impoverished, there'll be a very cheap labor pool. Right. So you won't have to worry about industrial China. Now you have a bunch of, you won't have to worry about like cheap labor in China, cheap labor in India. You've now got cheap labor, impoverishment and sweatshops in the EU. How sweet is that? Everything works perfectly. Right. Well, not exactly. So when they got their war with Ukraine, there were a couple of things that they speculated that would happen that not only didn't happen, the opposite happened. So let's talk about what their plan was, how it was supposed to work. Once they got their war going, they would then execute a master plan, which would include a worldwide economic war against Russia. They would get the EU now is going to be cut off from Russian energy, so they get to take Russia, the EU's industry, all of those things involved. We've talked about that, but they believed that since they so dominated South America, since they so dominated Africa and the Middle East, that all of these countries were afraid of them. And all they would have to say to them was, join us in this economic war against Russia, and then Russia's toast. They even had some kind of a thought that China would join in. And I guess they thought China was afraid of them. In their minds, they thought that China and Russia were still at odds. They were still back in the 50s or 60s. So the bottom line was, they had this huge master plan, which was going to be taking out Russia. And then after they took out Russia and controlled Russia's resources, they could go after China. That was the plan. The plan was there. And they executed the initial part of the plan, which is the Ukraine war. And next, they saw a problem in that the Europeans still were leaning towards wanting cheap energy from Russia. So they blew up the pipeline to stop that. They're like, okay, that would be a problem with our plan. We'll put an end to that. They blew the damn pipeline up. Now the Europeans can't get Russian energy even if they want it. Forget it. That ain't happening. It's over for Europe. So our plan can continue. And since they had so heavily armed Ukraine, they would continue to arm them. They would continue to supply them with data and intelligence and everything they needed. Ukraine would be able to fight Russia to a standstill for years and years to come. And Russia would get poorer and poorer. The people in Russia would get angry and overthrow Putin. It was all going to work, right? Except a couple of things. Number one, the countries in the global south, the Middle East, the South America, even the majority of Asia, Eurasia, Africa, none of these countries cooperated. Why? The U.S. has been oppressing these areas for years, attacking and blowing them up, pushing them around, stealing their resources. And when it got to the point where they said, oh, these countries were friends with Russia and China, they had good relations with Russia and China. And when the U.S. says, okay, you have to do what we tell you against Russia and China, and they're not as stupid as the Europeans. So when they said to the Africans, the Middle Easterns, the South Americans, the Asians, look, here's what we want to do. We want you to take an action that's going to be detrimental to your people. Yeah, you're going to starve, you're going to suffer, but you're not buying wheat and oil and things like that from Russia. Those people said, go to hell. No, we're not doing that. The Europeans will do it, but they're idiots. We ain't. And I mean the leadership of the I'm not saying the people of Europe. The people of Europe are propagandized. The leadership of Europe are corrupt, elite ruling class that's backstabbing their own people. Anyway, so the first thing that happened was the Russians and the Chinese banded together on a diplomatic mission to go out and ensure that they secured their relationships in the global south, in Africa, in Eurasia, in the Middle East, and it worked. All of these countries that had centuries long relations with the colonial powers, including the US and Europe, looked at it and said, nah, we don't have a good history with you guys. We don't want any parts of this. We're going to side with Russia. Plus, we need the commodities that they have. Meanwhile, a number of the industrialized countries that they expected to join them said, yeah, this would be suicide. We got certain commodities. We'll join with you and stuff, but we still got to buy certain commodities from Russia. India looked at it, and India said, well, wait a minute. We aspire to be a world power. We're a rising power. We see what you do to rising powers in Russia and China. You attack them and try to take them out. We know that if we work with you to take Russia out, you're then going to take China out, and we're going to be the only aspiring world power. So we know the crosshairs go on us next. So India said no. So then the plan to bring the world together against Russia fell apart quickly. And they said, hey, the whole world is against Russia, because they really did believe that was going to happen. It didn't. And that really wiped their plan out. That's what wiped their plan out, because not only did India and China and the global south and these other countries say, we're not going along with you, they said, hey, we're going to support Russia by buying the commodities in ever greater numbers than before. Russia said, well, we'll sell it at a discount, but we got so much oil and gas, what the hell? We can afford to sell it at a discount. We'll still make money. It's unlimited. And these countries said, well, that benefits us. I'll buy it. So you had countries looking out for unlike the Europeans, the American empire extended, looking out for their best interest. So now you have the US's plan to bring together the world to confront Russia fall completely apart. And now Russia has a conglomeration, has a huge group of countries that are now supporting it, that are now on its side. And now the U.S. empire is economically, diplomatically, is on its back feet, and Russia is coming downhill. Okay, that's bad enough. Now you've got the EU. The obvious thing was the EU can't exist. Their entire model was built on Russian energy, cheap Russian energy. They lose cheap Russian energy at a time when they already had economic problems. The countries, the EU, the entire continent economically starts to fall apart, and it's crumbling, and it's absolutely crumbling. But as it crumbles, that's fine with the U.S. empire, because the U.S. empire wanted to force its economy to crumble so we could steal all the industry and bring it over here. Right. So that's working fine. While the Europeans are finally starting to get upset, the U.S. is ready to, they're fine with that. Yeah, Macron came over and said, look, Biden, what about stealing their industry? And Biden said, go to hell and go home. Yeah, we're stealing it, and there's nothing you can do about it. Macron went home and mumbled a little bit, and Schultz is mumbling, and von der Leyen, they're doing some mumbling, but everybody knows they're corrupt elites and they're going to do nothing. So the Biden administration is not worried about any pushback from EU. You can read article after article. Let me give you a couple of articles that would imply that here's one. It implies that the Europeans are going to do something. EU must take action against U.S. von der Leyen. Joe Biden's investment plan could threaten the bloc's industry. No, it ain't going to could threaten the bloc's industry. It's taking the bloc's industry intentionally. And she says they must take action and step up to aid its own companies. And she goes on to talk about what's happening. Competition between the U.S. and the EU must respect a level playing field, she declared. We must take action to rebalance the playing field where the Inflation Reduction Act and other measures create distortions. No, there ain't no playing field. You ain't on the playing field. You are on the plate, right? You are dinner. Just face it. Now look, and let me show you the evidence. While von der Leyen blamed the Europe-wide energy crunch on Russia's military operation in Ukraine, the EU's own sanctions on Moscow impede critical repair work. Okay, so all of that, and she still won't say the U.S. is doing it to us. So why do you think Biden cares? Biden's like, look, yeah, we're stealing your oil. Shut up and blame Russia. And von der Leyen and company are like, yeah, we're having trouble. It's things aren't quite fair, but it's not the U.S. It's Putin. And the U.S. is like, good work. Just keep saying that until we can get the last factory over here. We see European Council President Charles Michel, the impact of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is harsher on the EU than on the U.S. Of course, that was the intent. That was part of the plan, you idiot. And now, I don't think he's stupid that he doesn't know that's part. They know that's part of the plan. He has to say that for the European people. They know the plan is to deindustrialize Europe. We don't even need to talk about that, do we? I know it. First of all, I'm just a schlep. If I can figure it out, you guys can figure it out. We think that people who are running the Europe and the EU and NATO, you think they don't know it? Of course they don't know it. They're complicit in making it happen. They just got to pretend like, oh, no. You think the US might be trying to steal our industry and impoverish us? Things are a little harder on us than they are on the US. And the US is like, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Shut up. And they're like, we're not quite sure if that's what they're trying to do, but I have an inkling they may be up to something. And the US is like, yeah, we're taking your industry. We're taking everything. You guys are going to be impoverished. Shut up and get out of the way. Oh, by the way, we need you to give us a hand doing it. And then the EU is like, I think I may be on to something here. Maybe these guys are, you think, trying to take our industry? Nah, couldn't be. So anyway, so you got that all going on. Let me show you something. Look at this. Let me show you what Europe is now. Let me show you what Europe is now. Let's look at what Europe is now. This is part of the perfect storm. Let's look at this. 1 in 4 Germans won't buy Christmas gifts this year. An increasing number of people will forego the tradition due to soaring prices. You know what they call that? Third world poverty. Oh, for God's sake. somewhere around here. But people always call you when you're doing a show. So it's called third world poverty. That's what it is. They're like, yes, 1 in 4 Germans won't buy a Christmas gift. Yes, poor people don't buy Christmas gifts. They don't buy Christmas turkeys. They don't buy a goose. They don't buy anything. That's what poor people don't do. And Germans are now poor people. So they're like putting that out like it's some strange thing. Yes, isn't that odd? They're not buying Christmas gifts. No, because poor people can't afford to buy Christmas gifts. Ask a poor person. Ask somebody that's really, really poor. Hey, what's going on for Christmas? Same thing that's going on every other day of the year. I'm going to be poor. That's what the Germans are now. 1 in 4 this year. Guess what? It'll be 5 and 4 next year. Okay. This year's 1 in 4. Next year's going to be 5 and 4. Germany is turning into a third world country. And these are the things that happen in third world countries. So it won't even be news next year. In fact, it'll be news next year. Hey, there are some Germans that are able to buy Christmas gifts. A couple, not many. Don't get me wrong. A couple. Yeah, they're you know what they're going to be given this year? A block of ice. They'll and it'll be, and it won't be hard to get a block of ice. All you'll have to do is take a square container, pour some water in it, and leave it sitting on your kitchen table. When you wake up the next day, you'll have a block of ice because you're not going to have any heat. Impoverished poor people don't have heat, and you'll have to eat that ice because you ain't going to have any food either. That's what Germany's all about. Let's look at the next one. EU suffering from Ukraine conflict. We've always looked at that. There's another one. Can we see that? Well, okay, here's the next one. UN ignores abuse of Ukrainian women in EU country. What is that all about? Well, here's the bottom line. And I said this many months ago. When you have a bunch of people, refugees coming in by the millions, and millions more are coming, they don't have food, they don't have anything. 80% of the refugees are female, because the men in Ukraine, their job is to stay home and to go out in the battlefield and get ripped apart by shrapnel from Russian artillery. That's what the U.S. empire has in store for them. Unfortunately for them, that's what they're doing. But the women, 80% of them going into Europe. Now, let's be honest. I mean, let's just be honest here. You've got people from what was probably either the poorest or the second poorest country in Europe going out into Europe, all over the place. No money. No, most of them don't even speak the language. You're Ukrainian. You speak Ukrainian, and you're now in the UK. You're now in a country where you don't speak the language. Lots and lots of young women that don't speak the language, and they're impoverished, and they're in another country. What do you think's going to happen? Yeah, abuse of Ukrainian women. The real threat to female refugees doesn't come from Russia. Nope. The UN and human rights bodies are turning a blind eye to reports of sexual exploitation of female Ukrainian refugees in Sweden. It ain't just Sweden, my dear and fluffy friends. So that another part of the perfect storm that isn't discussed enough, and that is the refugee problem. Millions. There's another maybe 10, 20 million, 15, 20 million Ukrainians. In the next couple months, Ukraine is getting cold as hell. No electricity. Cold as hell. No electricity. What do you think they're going to do? They're migrating out of the country somewhere where they can find electricity and maybe warmth. Bad news, Germany ain't going to be the place for that. They ain't going to have much better. France, etc., Spain, on Italy, on and on, they ain't going to be doing so much better either. So what you're going to have, part of the perfect storm, is that the EU, in a period of less than 12 months, has been turned into a third world area where people no longer are going to have things, simple things that we're accustomed to in our society, such as heat, such as adequate food, such as electricity 24 hours a day. You go to some of these countries, and you'll find countries where they've got electricity 12 hours a day, 3, 4, however many hours a day. Go to Lebanon, go to different places, and you'll go to places where the infrastructure is not doing well, and or they just don't have the money for the energy, and they have electricity some hours in the day, some hours they don't. Now, you go to South America right now, actually, most of the places in South America have it, and where they don't, at least it's warm. They got palm trees, okay? So you can sleep outside. You can sleep with the windows open. Doesn't matter because you're warm. Europe, yeah, no electricity, things of that nature. And they are teetering on the edge because they're hoping to make it through the winter with this stored gas. And if it's a really bad winter and they don't make it through, then you're looking at apocalyptic disaster. I think we're looking at a potential in Europe for apocalyptic level disaster, where you have entire countries, gigantic cities, metropolitan areas where that are like Kiev now, like Kiev, where these high-rise buildings don't have water. The water ain't going to go up. They don't have water. They don't have electricity. And you're looking at this in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of people in Europe. You can be looking at apocalyptic level disaster. And that's again part of the perfect storm. Potential for apocalyptic level disaster in Europe. You're looking at number two, the entire global south, the Middle East, Asia, all of these countries have rejected the United States attempt to corral them together in a coalition against Russia. Instead, they've been corralled together in a coalition against the US empire. It has isolated itself. Meanwhile, there are in the long term, now this is part of the perfect storm, but in the long term, a lot of these countries are looking at Europe crash. They're looking at the US crash, and they're saying, we got to find a better way because this thing's going in the wrong direction. It's going off the rails. So now they want to join BRICS, the BRICS coalition, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? They want to join that coalition. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? They want to, that's a Eurasian based kind of economic group. So they want to join these new groups. They want new ways to pay money that doesn't involve the US outside of the SWIFT messaging system. They want a new currency. They're working. So there is underway right now an alternative economic system that is ready to not challenge the dollar, not challenge the US. I don't think the way they're looking at it. It's to work outside of the context of American hegemony, which is the dollar system. So they don't like that context because the US empire abuses it for its own narcissistic reasons. So they're just saying, we just want to be able to work outside of the dollar system. So we're in control of that. And the Biden administration and the neocons can't use it anytime they want to for coercive means. So you've got the rise of a new economic system, a gigantic worldwide coalition in opposition into colonialism and imperialism that the U.S. empire pushes. You've got the crash of the European economy. Now let's go to Ukraine. What's going on there? Number of things, not the least of which being the U.S. and its vassals have been providing money and supplies and military hardware, material and training to the Ukrainian military. However, the Russians have been blowing it up faster than they can get it to them. So now the Western nations are starting to run short of military hardware to give to Ukraine for the Russians to blow up, because that's what it appears to be. They give it to Ukraine, the Russians blow it to hell. And in addition to that, they're running short of money because now Ukraine is nothing but a money hole. The economy, let's face it, if you got no electricity and your country's at war, I mean, it's not like they're producing a lot. Your industrial base, which is the Donbass and Eastern Ukraine, is gone, taken from you, right? So how are you making money? Well, apparently they were somehow laundering money at the FTX in this crypto scam, but that seems to be gone. It was a money laundering operation, not a lot of money in that anymore. And you're also finding now that the people in the US empire are losing their support for sending money, this never-ending money hole called Ukraine. The people are starting to look at their own needs and say, why are we giving them so much money? We're hungry, we're tired, we're poor, we're everything we need. Things are falling apart, our infrastructure is all falling apart. And you're getting that contradiction of empire, the US empire, right? An empire is like an octopus, right? You think of the octopus's body, and it has all these tentacles out that grab things and bring it into the mouth. The empire, the U.S. empire, the United States, um, proper 48 states, that's the head and the mouth of the octopus, and those tentacles go out all over the world in the form of 850 bases, and they grab stuff and they pull it in and they eat it. They pull in bananas from this country, coffee from this country, gold from this country, oil from this country, and they drag all that stuff to the middle. That's the U.S. empire. That's the way it works. And that empire now is starting to weaken. Why? Well, one of the problems is that they've got competition for those resources. China wants those resources. They're building things. Russia wants to sell people stuff. The U.S. sells a lot of stuff to people, but now Russia's a big commodity seller. So now the U.S. is hard to control these markets. They got competition. That's a big part of it. A big part of it is, and a gangster doesn't like another person selling stuff in their community. So the U.S. is like a mafia, and they're saying, China and Russia, you're not allowed to come in, go around the world. That's our community, entire world, and do business. And Russia and China is like, we ain't really listen to you. We're going to do what we want. It's problematic for the U.S. empire. And so this is their plan to deal with that, starting with Ukraine and then Taiwan. So they got no coalition. And the people now at home are starting to get upset because they're suffering, and they're starting to ask some questions. The Biden administration lost. Now, keep in mind something. Both parties are aligned with the intelligence, the national security state, and the neocon project to rule the world. However, that neocon project has centered itself in the Democratic Party and the mainstream of the Republican Party. There are some people, the Democratic Party is completely gone. There's a small contingent in the Republican Party that will at least question it and push back a little bit. And some of those people have some questions. They're going to come to power, and it's a small group, small but loud group, right? It's a small group in the Republican Party, but they're loud, and they want to know a little bit about this this online censorship program that the U.S. empire must do. The U.S. empire is in a position now where they cannot allow critical thinking. They cannot allow an intellectual discussion of what they're doing, because all they've got is cheap narratives that are easily debunked. And now you've got a few Republicans coming in saying, we want to look into some of this. I don't trust them to really push back against the empire, but they may ask some some uncomfortable questions of the Biden administration, and therefore causing some problems for the neocon project and giving some ammunition for those of us who are on the outside pushing it. So that could be a problem. Again, another part of the perfect storm is political instability here. And the United States' economy, the economy of the United States is teetering on the edge, and we could be looking at another 2008 style financial disaster. The only thing that the United States really has in its favor is that it's eating Europe. Right? It's living off of Europe. So the US may be okay for a while in that it's going to destroy Europe and steal all of Europe's industry, steal all Europe's money, steal Europe's business. It's just simply going to swallow Europe whole and leave Europe an old, pathetic husk of what was once a great industrial and powerful society. There'll be nothing left but poverty, disease, and sickness, and sadness and misery. But the U.S. empire itself and the contingent 48 states may be able to hold off its economic problems a little bit longer, a little bit, by destroying Europe. But the Europeans are going to have a big problem after that. And here's the thing, that creates another dynamic. One of the things that makes the U.S. empire strong is that it has that coalition in Europe. When it not only loses that coalition in Europe, but that coalition turns on it. When the Europeans wake up, too late, I might add, to realize that they've been had, that their bones have been picked clean, they're going to be angry and they're going to push back. And the U.S. is going to have real trouble in dragging them into a coalition to, quote, confront China. They're going to have real problem. And not only that, if that ain't bad enough, let's talk about what's going on. I didn't get to it, but let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine. The Russians have pushed this thing for a while, and they have dragged it out for quite a while. They went into Ukraine with what we would call an expeditionary force, not probably 10, 15% of their military, something like that. I've heard any numbers, 10, 20, 25%, whatever. Let's say 20% of their military. They went in. Well, they decided to do a call up, and now they're going to have a 500,000+ well-armed, well-trained men ready to fight in Ukraine, which means Ukraine does it at a time when the Ukrainian military has been fighting since February without a break, at a time when the U.S. empire is running out of weapons, running out of money, and running out of really support from its people to give them more, at a time when winter is hitting, and that ain't pleasant. Everything is against them at a time when the Russians are crushing and shutting down and stomping the infrastructure of Ukraine. Ukraine is almost at its weakest point. And when it hits its weakest point, the Russian military in Ukraine will be at its strongest point. Again, the perfect storm. At that point, you'll have, and let me add this. So the Russian military will be at its strongest point, well armed, well trained, well fed, well motivated, feeling that they're defending their borderland, right? The Ukrainian army will be tired with a lot of conscripts that they grabbed off the street, not armed well, trained minimally, you know what I mean, and facing this gigantic monster coming down. It's the bear bearing down on him with his teeth, with his fangs out. At the same time, the Ukrainian infrastructure kaput. So the Ukrainian people are getting the hell out and they ain't coming back. So here's what you got to ask yourself. If the Ukrainian infrastructure is destroyed, wiped out, and now let's face it, most of the Ukrainian people are getting the hell out and go west, right? What's the Ukrainian army defending? What is it that they're really defending? If you got a country that has no electricity, has really no energy, has no industry, it's run by some idiots, puppets for another country, and you're out there on the battlefield and you got this humongous bear of 500,000 troops bearing down on you, you're sitting there. What is it that you are actually defending? Are you defending a country where there's people? Because the people are getting the hell out. They ain't staying there. So the Ukrainian army is going to be sitting there defending dirt, rocks and dirt and abandoned buildings because with no electricity and no heat. How do you win that? Against a military force that has overwhelming power. You're going to be getting bombed night and day. You're going to be missile strikes night and day. It ain't getting better for them. How do you keep those troops motivated enough to fight? And as I said, what are they fighting for? What would victory look like for these people if they won? We hear, oh, they're going to take back this or that. They can't. They're losing town after town. They're losing villages after village. They're being forced to retreat. And what we're hearing is a propaganda narrative that says they're going to take Crimea. They're going to take Donbass. They're going to go all the way to Moscow and surrender. They'll be in Red Square before the sun comes up. So all they got left in Ukraine is propaganda. And the people with no electricity in the winter, that ain't sustainable. So we're looking at now, I don't see now that the electricity is being cut off. How can people stay in a country where the climate is cold that has no heat and electricity for the next through December and January when it gets really cold? How do people live and survive with no electricity, no heat, and no water? They will die and they will starve and they will freeze to death. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to get the hell out and they're going to go west, young man. But when they go west, the people there are going to be hungry and they're going to be cold and they ain't going to have much more than you got. And they're going to have rolling blackouts. The people in Europe ain't used to rolling blackouts and they ain't going to be happy about them in December and January. You're talking people who their lives they're used to. They're in Berlin. They're in London. The young people are used to going to the club and hanging out and drinking and partying and smoking weed or whatever the hell they do. They're used to going to the rave and shaking and partying and having DJs. They're used to having a good time. They're used to going to the sidewalk cafes. They're used to getting fresh bread and pasta and delicious wine and going to the pub and having a pint and watch the soccer match. That's their expectation of an industrialized country. And they ain't living in that reality no more. They're living in poverty where they can't even buy a damn Christmas gift for their children. How you think that's going to work out? Again, another part of the perfect storm. Now the Ukrainians, when they leave, and now and they go to other parts of the West, they're going to be desperate and they're going to be facing desperation. You know what you're going to get when people are desperate and they're hungry? Crime. You're going to get robbery, you're going to get murder, you're going to get theft, you're going to get prostitution, and with prostitution comes disease and drugs. It is going to be ugly. So Europe is in collapse. Ukraine, one might argue, has already collapsed. And now the rats are just getting off the sinking ship. Now, I'm sorry, I don't want to refer to the Ukrainian people as rats. That's I don't mean to speak of the Ukrainian people in a pejorative manner, in a negative manner. I'm just saying the Ukrainian people, because they're not stupid, are going to get the hell out of this country as best they can. How do they do it? How do they travel? How do they even do it? And where do they go? And what happens when they get to the border of Poland? What happens when there's millions? Poland can't deal with the people they have now. What happens now when there's millions of Ukrainians at the Polish border? Ooh, and they want to get into Germany and Poland and Romania. They want to get into everywhere. And these people don't have anything of their own, and they can't handle it. Perfect storm for disaster in the US. And people are going to be looking at the US empire saying, what do we do? And the Biden administration is going to say, what do you mean we? This ain't our problem. We created this problem for you. In the same way that when Macron said, or the EU says to Biden, hey, what about this industry you're taking? And Biden says, shut up and get out off my lawn. But you're stealing our industry. Oh, gee, you're a real genius. Huh? How's it going there, Cat Mobius? Get the hell out of here. And by the way, give me the keys to your industry because I'm taking it. In the same way, when the US says, and the EU says to the US, oh, by the way, we're struggling, Ukrainian refugees everywhere, we're out of electricity, we're out of food, we might run out. What should we do? And the US is going to say to Europe, what do you mean we? This was our plan. Of course you're in a total disaster and collapse. Everything's working out just the way we thought it would. So deal with it. So at that point, there will come a time, I believe, when the Europeans will have to make a decision. Do they attempt to ally with Russia, align with them at least enough that they can get enough energy to survive? And now that Nord Stream 2 is blown up, I don't even know how they do that. But they can try. They can beg, borrow, and steal and hope the Russians have mercy on them, which they probably won't. But the Russians are not stupid, and they know that if they reconnect with the EU as far as energy is concerned, it will benefit them in a number of ways. So I suspect that the Russians would, in some ways, reconnect with the Europe eventually in ways that benefits them. And that's it. But they don't trust the Europeans, and they'll never be friends with them again. So that's another part of the perfect storm. And last but not least, the big part of it is this, and that is the crisis in leadership. And this was intentional. The U.S. National security state has intentionally rearranged and meddled with the governments of its vassals, such as UK, as a for instance, right? They ensured that in the same way that the Democrats and the Republicans are going to give you the same thing, that the Tories and Labor are going to give you the same thing, that is 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other, that if you want to back off Ukraine, there's no party in the US that's going to, in the UK that's going to do that. That if you want something different other than just neoliberal hell, that they have created two identical parties. And they've got one system. What basically, you go to a restaurant, that restaurant's got one kitchen. You can choose your waiter, but you've got the same food. You've got a menu. That menu says you can choose from these list of items, and those lists of items are all cooked in the same kitchen. But you can just get choose which waiter you want for it. That's what they got in UK. Do you want the Tories? Do you want Labor? Choose your waiter. But the food that you're going to get is all going to be cooked in the same kitchen. It's all comes off the same menu. menu: neoliberal, neocon, hell. That's all you can choose. But you can either get Starmer or some schmuck like Sunak or whoever they put in, the placeholder that they put in. That's your choices. And the US did that in Germany and on and on. And what do you get? You get people like Baerbock, you get people like von der Leyen, you get people like Habeck. These people are not intelligent. They now you get look at Biden. He's wandering around. The Biden administration, first of all, they're led by a guy, if you know his history, he was never very bright. This guy, Joe Biden, was never an intellectual. At his best, he was not an intellectual. He's not a real smart guy. Number one, and he's surrounded with a bunch of sociopaths. Look at Tony Blinken. Look at Fiona Hill. Look at all of these idiots. You know what you'll see in the Biden administration a whole lot of? Dead shark eyes, sociopath. That's where you can see a sociopath. You can see it in their eyes. Dead shark eyes. That look in the shark's in that great white's mouth when he rolls his head over just before he clamps down on you and he bites your guts out. That's the look that Tony Blinken has every morning when he's brushing his teeth. That's the guy he's looking at. You ever seen Fiona Hill? You ever seen Ned Price? You ever seen all of the people that surround Biden? Look at their faces. Stone, man. There is no emotions there. There ain't an emotion to be found. Anger, hate, narcissism. Yeah, you find a lot of that, but that's about it. And so he's surrounded by a bunch of narcissists. And the problem with narcissists, the problem with sociopaths is this. Effectively, they're the stupidest people in the history of the world. Let me give you an example from law enforcement. You might have heard this before. I like to tell stories, but I'll tell you this story. And this is not stupidity. This is a sociopath. Sociopaths are something very different than stupid. Let me explain. Two people are in a car and they are cousins. They are relatives. One of the people gets paid. He cashes his check. He has $500. He's in the car with his cousin. It's pretty clear to me by the time this thing's over that his cousin's a sociopath. They get in the car. Yeah, cousin, let's go. I got to stop by the convenience store and pick up a pack of cigarettes. I'm a non-smoker. I ain't into cigarettes, but I understand. Pull over. He takes the $500. He opens the armrest. He sticks the $500 in the armrest. He closes it. There's nobody in the car but his cousin and himself. He goes in. He gets his cigarettes. He comes out. He opens the armrest, and the $500 is gone. And his cousin has no idea what happened to it. He's just sitting there. You seen what's happened to my money? I don't know. Did you take my money? No. But there's nobody in the car but you, and you saw me put $500, and nobody else came over to this car. There's nobody that could possibly taken that money but you. I didn't take the money. He calls the police and says, "Look, the police are here. You're my cousin. I don't want you to go to jail. I'm done with you. We're not friends anymore. Stay away from me. Just give me my $500 back." I don't know what you're talking about. Come on, man. Give me my 500. I didn't take your money. And the police then say to the sociopath, "Look, it appears you took his money. He said if you give him his money back, he won't prosecute. I don't have his money. In that case, you don't mind if we pat you down, do you?" No. The police then pat the guy down, and the $500 is in his sock. It didn't, and he gets carted off to jail. It didn't have to be. Think about it. Now, one may look at it and say, that guy was really stupid. I mean, come on. He had to know that he was going to get caught. He had to know that nobody was out. And you will sit there and rationalize this. And from a rational perspective, it doesn't make sense, does it? Not for us, because we ain't psychopaths. A psychopath doesn't have the ability to consider the ramifications of his or her actions. The psychopath is sitting there, cousin Garland, as it were, I guess is good enough. Cousin Garland goes in there. The psychopath then says, "There's $500 here. I want that $500. I can get that $500. I'll take the $500. I want it. I can get it. Here it is. Boom. I got $500. Wow, this is great. The sociopath doesn't have the ability to consider his cousin's feelings. He doesn't think about, hey, my cousin needs that money to pay his rent or whatever. I don't know. He earned it. It's on. This is my cousin. But no, the sociopath is stuck here. Wow, there's $500. I want the $500. I can get the $500. Why wouldn't I get it? I can. I want it. I can do things with it. I'd like to have it. And it's right next to me. I'll take it and I'll put it in my sock. Now I've got $500 in my sock. Isn't that great? Now, cousin comes back, Garland comes back and says, where's my $500? I got my $500. I don't want to give this money up. I like it. I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about. Why do I say that? Because the sociopath doesn't have the ability to think about the future, to consider what's going to happen as a result of their actions. They're not thinking this thing through. They are very zen. They are in the moment. I got $500. This is great. The police get there. They're not thinking 5 minutes ahead. They're not thinking, uh-oh, I'm going to go to jail and then this is going. No, I'm not telling him anything. I got this $500 and I'm keeping it. It's my $500 now. And when the police ask him questions, no, because in the moment, and when the police say, can I pat you down? I can't say no because it's the police. Okay, go ahead. Why? Because the psychopath doesn't deal with the problems until they arise. Well, they haven't caught me with, I got the $500 right now. When I say that, and I mean in seconds, when I say yes, pat me down, the cops are going to pat me down and they're going to find the $500. I'll deal with it then. I'll deal with it when that happens, but not until. But I'm not giving this $500 because I want it. Joe Biden is surrounded with people who think like that. That's Ned Price. That's Fiona Hill. That's Avril Haines. That's Victoria Newland. That's all of them. They're a bunch of freaking sociopaths. And they're not thinking. You know what they do? They come up with a plan that works for all of them. Hey, the Russians are losing. The Russians are losing. The Russians are losing. The Russians are losing. What do you say the Russians are losing? Yes. How about you? Yeah. So they all say the Russians are losing. Why? Because if the Russians were losing, it would be in their best interest and everything would be fine. They don't stop to think. But if the Russians aren't losing, and they're not, but I just made that up, they don't stop to think about that. Right now, if the Russians were losing, my plan would be fine. I will tell everybody the Russians are losing. If anybody on Twitter says the Russians ain't losing, we'll get them thrown off. We'll get them suspended for life. What's Garland Nixon saying? Hey, guys, the Russians ain't losing. You're suspended for life. Ha, ha, ha. Things are going great. Everybody who said anything to oppose our narrative is thrown off of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. We got a nice narrative going here. The Russians are losing. The Europeans are going to be fine. They'll make it through the winter. Great. We're not stealing their industry. All great. They just have narratives. Why? Because they want the $500 and they got the $500 and they don't want to give up that $500. Right now, they wanted that war in Ukraine and they got their war in Ukraine. And now they have to pretend as though that war in Ukraine is working out well. And as far as they're concerned, they got a plan. It is. It's working out great. Whether it is or not is irrelevant to them. If it were working out the way they wanted to, things would be going well. So they just say it is and suppress anybody who pushes back. And you ask yourself, well, wait a minute. It's getting cold. General winter has arrived. Things are about to fall apart in Europe. The people in Europe are getting froggy and they're starting to say, you're screwing us, man. We can't deal with this. We, not being sociopaths, would start thinking we need a plan. We need to figure out how we're going to deal with this. This damn thing's going to fall apart on us. But we'd be thinking about the future, wouldn't we? We'd be thinking about the results and the ramifications of our actions. We'd be thinking about what people are going to say to us and how we're going to have to deal with this when like everything, when Ukraine collapses, when the EU collapses, when the economy collapses, when the governments get thrown out. We'd be thinking about that. What are the results of what we're doing with the dollar worldwide, seizing the money of Russia? Other countries are going to say, wait a minute, I'm not going to store my sovereign funds in London and in the US because anytime they get pissed off, they'll take our money, right? If you're not a sociopath, you're going to think about that because that's the future. If you're the sociopath, you know what you think about? Ha ha ha. Russia's got $500 and I want that $500 and I can get that $500. I'm taking the $500. You don't consider the future because you're sitting there. Look at Ned Price and these people. Look at them talk. Russia is losing and Vladimir Putin is lying to everyone. Not a movement. Look at their foreheads, dude. Look at their noses. Look at their eyes. Not a wrinkle. Nothing. Stone cold, dead shark eyes. Heartless, emotionless sociopaths lying between their teeth without a regret, causing absolute misery, pain, and hell to the people of Ukraine, saying we support Ukraine, causing miserable misery and hell to the entire continent of Europe without a blink. They'd do that and go drink a cup of tea. Biden had Macron over here and basically told Mr. Macron, go to hell, we're steering your industry, get out. But first, we got a nice steak and lobster dinner. They had a dinner with lobster and shrimp and all this kinds of stuff. Come here. Why? Tonight we eat. We have an extravagant dinner. Wine, garçon, bring us more wine, bring us more seafood, bring us more steak. They literally had this like lobster dinner and all this kind of stuff. They ate the best of food. Today we eat. Now you go back to your country and you tell them you had a great meal. And he's like, yeah, but my country's going to be out of electricity and kind of hungry. And, do you understand the history of France, guillotines, things of that nature, the French Revolution? And Biden's like, get out. Don't come back. Thanks for the $500. And so what happens? What happened to this guy who stole the $500? At some point, the cops found the money in his sock, didn't they? And it all fell apart. And off he goes to the hooskow. And he may not have wanted to deal with the results of his actions, the ramifications of his poor decisions. But eventually, he had no choice. And now, December and January, we got a perfect storm. We have the Europeans getting significant pushback from their people, the leaders. They're incompetent. They're corrupt. They're going to get, most of them will get thrown out of office, if not hung or guillotined. They're in a world of trouble. Their lives will literally be in danger. There will be violence in Europe. And that ain't going to save Europe because you're going to have Ukrainian refugees running all over the place, spray painting swastikas on every World War II monument that they can find, things of that nature. It ain't going to be a pleasant time, okay? There's some people coming that may have a quite questionable ideology, and they're going to be looking for friends. There will be terrorism. They will be armed to the friggin' teeth from all of the war material that's been pumped into Ukraine that'll be moved around Europe. Europe is I'm just saying, if you were planning a vacation, Christmas holiday, Berlin might not, maybe okay. I don't know, but I'm thinking it's going to be kind of nippy and things are going to be expensive. It ain't going to be real good. You might want to postpone that and see how things work out in the summer. I'm just saying you might want to postpone it. So things are going to be very, very difficult there. And I think that if, in fact, what I suspect may happen, if there's a bad winter, if they run completely out of energy, you're looking at catastrophe. You're looking at a humanitarian disaster of biblical proportions. That potential is there. Let's hope it doesn't happen, but let's not pretend that that potential in Europe does not exist for a humanitarian catastrophe of biblical proportions. That if they run out of energy, there's the $500 and the cops are there. The results of your actions will be staring you in the face. And what are the neocons going to do then? Come up with a new narrative? Hey, Europe has fallen apart and there's people starving and freezing to death. No, they're not. That's Russian propaganda. That's exactly what Putin would want you to say. That's the best they can do as the people charge into the state capitals and start hanging the leaders. No, that's not happening. That's what Putin would want you to think. That's all they can do. That's all they can do. And of course, our economy has to spin out of control because, like, our number one partner for buying stuff, U.S. stuff, is the EU, and Ain't going to be able to buy a whole lot of stuff when they're broke, are they? So the perfect storm, December, January, the Russians will take significant control. Here's a big question. I think we got a question mark, and that is, will the Russians grind down Ukraine, or will they sweep through Ukraine? I'm guessing grind down Ukraine. Now, let me add one more thing that happened. The last thing I'll add is the U.S. empire's plan was to harass China, and a big part of that was to ally itself with a kind of extremist independence government run by what's her name? Win, basically. And a Cyan Win, people know whatever the hell her name is, the woman who runs the ruling party in Taiwan. So the U.S. was like, yes, sirree, we got Taiwan on lockdown, and we will use that to harass the living dog crap out of China. Well, unfortunately, the people of Taiwan have spoken, and the ruling Independence Party has been crushed in the general elections. Now, these are all the local elections, about 11,000 elections, but the ruling party in Taiwan has been crushed, which means there's about 2 years before the next election, and we probably have a 2-year window that's going to be very, very difficult for the U.S. empire to use. It's going to be more difficult than it is now for the U.S. empire to utilize Taiwan as a blunt object in the same way that it used Ukraine as a blunt object. It's going to be more difficult. The people are going in the wrong direction there as far as the U.S. is concerned. So that, again, the perfect storm, they got another flop. And as they really just rake Europe over the coals and impoverish them, I think it's going to get more and more difficult to hold that coalition together so they can utilize that coalition to go after China. Just things are falling apart. And a big part of it is because the Biden administration is nothing but an idiot surrounded by sociopaths. An idiot surrounded by sociopaths is not a real competent administration, and I don't see, even if they had a good plan, which they don't, they couldn't execute it because they're too damn stupid. All right, let's take a look and see what we got. Let's see. We have some super chats. Let's start with MindTab says the ideology won't survive. We will. Very, very, very true. Wesley Mack says empire days are over. One world, live and let live. USA stand down. Exactly. Let's look. Keep looking. Sparky, good old Sparky says Europeans can learn from Haiti. Clay with salt cookies will help keep them from starving. I lasted 41 days on them and could have gone longer, but I got some chicken wings. Minerals keep muscles going. Interesting. Well, Sparky is a real knowledgeable feller, or I guess take it for granted Sparky's a feller. Retro says, will masses accept digital dollar mandates? Good question. I think that's one of the things they're going to try to push you. I'm sure you know that, these digital dollars. CCT, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate that. Let's go here. Sparky, Trump endorsed McCarthy for speaker. Why does Trump choose those against him? McConnell, Graham, Romney, Ray, Haspel, Pence, Pompeo. Because Trump is part of the system, but he wants to keep one foot out. He wants to play the hokey pokey. He wants to put his right foot in, his right foot out, his right foot in, and shake it all about. Right? He wants to try. It's one of the difficult tasks for people like Trump and for people now in America is people who try to be a part of the system and not a part of the system at the same time. And the system don't like that, and they ain't going to let it happen. So that's what Trump's trying to do. Does he really have a choice? Let's see. How about Andrew Novak says multiple substations recently attacked by Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Isn't that interesting? Again, that's a good point. You got electricity out at a bunch of places in North Carolina. And why is the electricity out? Because a bunch of people they found that have went to these substations and fired on them with weapons, right? That's instability. That wasn't Russians. I bet you it wasn't Muslims. I bet you it was Americans who are pissed. There's instability. There's going to be militaristic style terrorism and attacks right here. I saw that. Look it up right now. There's something going on where a bunch of people attacked these substations, attacked them in the United States, in North Carolina near Fort Bragg, and put lots of people out of electricity. The country is becoming unstable. The country's becoming unstable. And that's what you're looking at now. Instability, political instability. Isn't that something? All right, let's go. Let's look at Rockfin. Do we have anyone on Rockfin? We have some people. So let's look and see what questions people asking on Rockfin. Mary Tierfenbacher, thank you, a tip. We got JVB with a tip. We've got, we got some questions. Darth Sidious. And not a lot of questions. What's this say? What's more amazing than these idiots being in office and in positions of power is the fact that most Americans would rather ignore that than admit their party is responsible, either one. Yeah, let me tell you something that happened the other night to me. So I was doing my radio show in Washington, D.C., and this guy calls in and he says, yes, he says, because I had talked about Ukraine and Nazis, and this is on my Pacifica show. And the guy says, yeah, it's the lesser of two evils. I said, what do you mean? He says, he admits that there's Nazis, but he says Nazis are the lesser of two evils between the Russians and the Nazis. He goes on to say, Russians are barbarians. And I'm like, hey, dude, I don't allow people to call into my radio station and say this whole group of people are X. I don't believe in collectively calling a group of people good, bad, or indifferent. So no, that's unallowed. So he goes on to say, the United States doesn't attack electrical plants. I'm like, what do you know about our attack on Serbia and Iraq and Afghanistan? That's exactly what we do. We don't do double taps. And I'm like, that's exactly what Julian Assange is in trouble for showing that the U.S. did double taps. You have to look up what double taps are. And that is, you bomb a place, and when people come in to save the people that you just bombed, you bomb it a second time to kill the rescuers, right? That's specifically what the U.S. did. That's specifically what was shown in the 2010 video that Assange released, the WikiLeaks release, right? So what you have is you have people who are supporting things that are stupid. I used to say this. I used to say, I remember when I used to work, when I worked for the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. This was a few years back, and I worked for the ACLU, and I did public policy stuff. And I was working. There's something in the U.S. and it's called asset forfeiture, where the U.S. government can come in and they can just say, or the police can open your trunk and say there's $10,000 in it. They can take your money, and then they can say, okay, you have to prove that you got it legally. And that, I felt it was unconstitutional. I was working and fighting against that. I was actually working with some people in the state house to pass some laws to stop that, because it's such an egregious thing, right? And what I used to say about asset forfeiture and seizure laws is there's only two kind of people that understand it and people that support it. Because if you understand it, you can't possibly support it. And that's what I say about the Nazis in Ukraine and the whole Ukrainian situation. There's only two kinds of people: the people that really understand it and the people that support the Nazis in Ukraine. Because if you understand the dynamics of the Ukrainian conflict, you can't support those Nazis. That's a reality. If you understand it, you really can't, unless you're just like a fascist kind of person. And then, hey, you're all for fascism anyway. So what the hell? All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate it. I'll be on. As I always say at the end of my videos, I want to thank everybody. Don't forget, go to my Rockfin page and become a member. It costs nothing to become a member. And if for some reason they throw me off of YouTube tomorrow or whenever, you will be a member of my Rockfin, and you can still watch all of my videos. And I'll be on daily. If and when, excuse me, they throw me off of YouTube. Sorry about for yawning, but it's late on Sunday night, huh? Additionally, as I always tell everyone, Rockfin, I love Rockfin. Rockfin is a free speech platform. They don't do any advertising. If you possibly could, you can become a paid subscriber. It's $9.99 per month. I think that's getting ready to go up next week anyway, but it's $9.99. So this is the perfect time. I think it goes up to $14.99 on the 7th, but right now it's $9.99 a month. And if you sign up for a year, you get 2 free months. You don't have to. You can become a free member. But if you can, that would help support the channel and help support a free speech platform that does not do any advertising, and they ain't going to kick me off for what I say. So I appreciate anybody that can do that, become a subscriber. I appreciate it. If you can't afford it, don't worry about it. Just don't become a subscriber. Just become a member for free and enjoy it. The only advantage that subscribers do get is I do all Rockfin creators, we do at least one show that's called a premium show per week, and subscribers get to see that. I do mine every Wednesday morning with Scott Ritter, which is an update on the Ukrainian situation. So you do get to see that. That's the only thing. So thank you. If you can do Patreon, I appreciate $1, $5, $100, whatever you can do a month. Certainly buy me a call, PayPal, buymeacoffee.com/Garland NH. You can see that. Why the hell they stuck the H in there, I don't know. And once again, Cash App. So anyone who can afford to help support the channel, I appreciate it. If you can't afford it, don't worry about it. Just click on the like button and share this on all your platforms with your friends. Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate everybody taking extra time to watch my video and hang out with me. Peace. I'm out.